Have you ever heard of the musical known as the Puppet Master's Regime? Most likely you haven't. In fact, most die-hard theater lovers are often unfamiliar with this little production. It was a 1934 stage play, and the music, lyrics, and book were written anonymously. It starred upcoming performers such as Timmy Cutie Pie Wright, Sally Wilkers, Henry Gregory, and many others. At the time, it was the most expensive production to date. It was said to be the biggest, most spectacular stage show all the way to San Francisco and back. Here are the testimonies of the witnesses who bear witness to the play, The Puppet Master's Regime. Testimony 1, Tyler Warwick. I went to see the show about a week after I turned 33. The ticket was a gift from my sister, who knew how much I loved the theater. I remember the signs for it were huge and rather gaudy. Oh, and the playbill. It was just a single red dot with a doll-like face on it. It seemed a bit melancholy for what I assumed was to be a musical comedy, but I didn't pay much attention to that. I was going to see a Broadway show after all. Testimony 2, Georgina Long. I had come to New York with my parents on an opportune vacation. After my grandmother had died, a Broadway musical seemed just like what we needed. Anyway, the cast made completely of new people, young children and adults alike, who were longing to get back on the stage after vaudeville became old news. It was quite charming, really. But I did take notice of that odd little playbill. All the playwrights and lyricists and everyone else were all unnamed, and that design, just a little red dot with a peculiar little face in the middle of it. Testimony 3, Carl Hannigan. I do recall most of the first act. Then again, who could forget? The story was slightly hard to follow at first. There was a little boy who lived in a puppet shop, or maybe he lived down the street. No, he worked in the puppet shop. But he was homeless, so they provided him with a home there. The kid's name was Mortem, something weird, Mortimer? Moriator. Yes, it was Moriator. Moriator's employer was this old man named Mr. Obusker. I remember his name because his character was unimaginably unsettling, bouncing all around and getting angry at the little boy, all while keeping this nasally, giggly voice. Anyhow, the production opened to Moriator and the odd fellow getting into an argument over the boy not doing his work. And then two of them sang this peculiar number about puppets. It wasn't a normal song, or at least the musicality wasn't normal. The lyrics were very enchanting, and the music did this odd flowing thing about the room. Instruments would get very quiet without losing any power. Maybe it was just the acoustics? I'm most likely explaining it wrong anyway. Oh well, but in time we got used to it and the show progressed. Testimony 4, Gabriel Johnston. This youngster, Moriator, something like that, was quite insecure about his stay in the puppet shop and paranoid that his boss would throw him out. I was an aspiring lyricist at the time, and I do the lyrics to a few original community theater projects, so I was fascinated with the wording in these songs. I scribbled down a few lines after I went home, unless I'm remembering wrong. The little puppet shop boy and Mr. Obby something had an introductory duet, and then Moriator went off for a short lament. This was a different, much more somber tune. If I say and I do everything right, I can live in the day and steer clear of the night. Out there in the dark, there's a world of lies. I can hear them whisper, and sometimes I can see their eyes. The eyes confuse me for a moment, but I assumed that he was talking about the stars. It seemed as though the number was unnecessarily tragic and poorly situated within the show, but that was a minor quibble. Now, Moriater had a girlfriend named Trahunt and a boyfriend named Abelot. After interrupting the final note in his lament, they all gushed about how much they loved puppets, but they couldn't afford one from Moriater's guardian's shop. So they transitioned into this vibrant little number about joining forces to raise money so they could build their own puppet. After this, the three all headed for school, and the story took a sharp turn in a different direction. After several attempts to begin again, now they had this really nasty teacher or headmistress named Madame Risperio, or something like that, I can't recall. There was a reprise of the song from the before, and she overheard them. At first, her remarks about the children's fantasies were somewhat comical, but then the light fixed on her, and she sang this heartbreaking song, the meaning of which was up for interpretation. It felt like it was about love, but there were all these strange puppet metaphors. The only lyric that stayed with me is, "Stroll through the wood, cracks, show them your pains, the hole in your throat, and the strings in your veins." Then she went in on this little breakdown. I assumed it was poorly conceived character trait. She began singing off key and went to beat one of the kids. The curtain fell and there was a scuffle heard on stage. People whispered to each other, but rising new orchestra piece silenced us. The curtain rose again and we were right outside the puppet shop. Testimony 5. Luis Roberts. Mortimer and his friends went into this town and sang a song about selling dolls, I think it was, because the little girl made dolls in her spare time, and she had to sell them. I remember those strange background characters. The company was so absolutely monotonous. They all wore some form of dark clothing, and each of them was very, very tall. I can remember how they all had their faces covered up by hair or hats or veils. None of them spoke, none of them even sang during the course of the show. They just walked in perfectly straight lines, as if they weren't even part of the production. Anyways, the strange song about buying dolls, it had absolutely no life. But for some reason, these children were putting their all into it. I could see the pain in their faces as they hit those high notes. And something else, as the lyrics went on, they seemed to get a little... It's so hard to explain. They all looked like they were hurting. They were so pale and nervous all of a sudden. Coming from a Broadway family, I convinced myself that it was only stage fright, but it still made me just a tiny bit anxious. Testimony 6. Carrie Laurie. The kids all got their money from this strange man in a cloak who sang a simple little tune. I still recall the lyrics. Despite the fall of rain, little kitties, everyone needs a little song. Wooden dolls give you pain, little kitties. Go on, little kitties, run along. His character was never really explained, but I remember how truly gripping the melody was. So haunting. It got you right there in the gut. Even the little kid actors seemed unsettled by the new turn of the show. They all kept stuttering over their lines as they spoke and sang, and then a light bulb over the stage went out. Everyone gasped, and one man, I think, even laughed. The noise it made really spooked the little girl, Little Miss, what's her name? All the names were so very strange. All I know is that the light bulb had gone out and the actors were stumbling across the stage. The whole thing looked like a terrible flop. When the children re-entered the puppet shop, they presented Mr. Obisker with the puppet pieces they acquired while the audience wasn't looking, singing a braggedy sort of chant, we done, diddy diddy done, did it. It was obnoxious, but thankfully brief. After that, the light fixed on Mortimer, or Mortiator, and began another tune. The song was a dud, and all I remember was that it flubbed the last line. The lyric had something to do with the final stroke of light, or some sort of long-winded moon-based metaphor. All I know is that he forgot the words, and all that could be heard in the theater was the sounds of car horns outside the building. The boy, he didn't seem shocked or embarrassed or nothing, but his posture improved out of the blue, and the orchestra stopped. He projected half of the word, sorry, then suddenly burst forth into wordless vocalization. The music resumed, and the other characters began to join him. Testimony 7. Marcus Edgar. So after that bulb went out, the whole set started falling apart. We, the audience, tried our best to ignore it, but it was near impossible. I saw 2 sets of very angry attendees get up and leave. The set piece for the puppet shop screeched its way onto stage, and we could see the paper sky background falling down in the far back. The lights also dimmed in what we assumed was an attempt to hide the malfunctioning set pieces. The kids, with the help of an oddly monotonous Mr. Obisker, constructed this puppet, and this strange song played. To this day, I don't know what they were saying. At the time, it sounded vaguely like Latin, but when I went on to study Latin in college on the next year, it certainly wasn't anything like I had learned. I remember how it enchanted me, though. It enchanted all of us. We all began to feel this thing course through us. I remember a few people humming in an attempt to rid themselves of the sound, and those in the front row seemed to be crying out in what sounded like pain. The actors themselves looked as though they were about to pass out at any moment. They were doing this odd sort of ballet, tripping all over themselves, and at a few lights started flashing and breaking. We all sat and waited for the song to end when I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I can't. I can't. Testimony of George Frank. The lights were going on and off at random, and we were all praying the damn song would end soon. It had this force going with it. It was sucking us in. We could feel it. The little kids, the puppet men were dancing all around when, well, you see, I really thought I could do it. I thought I could do it. I was right there in the 5th row, and so I saw, but I can't. Testimony of Carolyn Mark. The lighting was completely out of control. It was a mess, and that song, it was awful, but something about it. It was powerful. It had a force. I watched intently as the dancers began to skip around, and we thought they were the lights. Final testimony. The actual events of the final scene of Act 1 of the Puppet Master's regime have been up for debate for many years. Few people are willing to speak about what happened on stage during those final moments. Many believe that there is no actual record of an interview with somebody who was willing to tell the tale. This is not true. One testament survives from a Billy Prescott, who was only 6 at the time of the show. At such a young age, one might assume he was less affected by what he recalls happening. I was just a kid, so I don't remember much. All I can vaguely recall is that song. It was giving me a headache. I turned to my father to ask him if we could leave when suddenly I saw the stage illuminate in this bright red light. The music stopped as one instrument after another died out, and I swear I heard pounding underneath the floor. Everyone was questioning what was happening, even the actors. I remember that teacher lady being pushed through the door of the shop, and then everyone else came in, flying in from off stage, toppling on top of each other like rag dolls. There were people who didn't fit the design scheme of the production, stagehands and technical workers. I assume now. I remember the little girl screamed at the audience, then ran behind the shopkeeper while other actors continued singing. A few people started crying right there on the stage when, without warning, this curtain came forward. It's hard to describe what it looked like. It was a clear plastic wall. It came down from above. Several years later, I saw Carrie, the musical, on Broadway during one of its few runs. The thing that came down on the programmers when Carrie was using laser lights to kill everyone, it was just like that. A bunch of set pieces from earlier scenes came down onto the sides of the stage, trapping all the actors in the center. Chaos erupted. The actors stopped singing and began pounding on the plastic wall. Then, for some reason, they began to back away as if some unseen assailants were approaching them. They fled to the back of the stage, all except the little boy. He was the only one who hadn't stopped singing. Amid all that screaming and crying, the curtain flew out, and everything was in silence. Due to that odd abruptness, the audience thought it was just a horrible ending to a terrible musical. We were about to get up when the curtain opened again, revealing the stationary plastic wall, upon which was a single light fixed onto the little boy, Moriator. He had crawled his way through. We could see the blood on his hands, but the way he looked was there were strings attached to every part of his body. We could all see his stomach, or lack of one anyway. It was like somebody had put a huge ice cream scooper through his belly. He was sobbing all over the stage, twitching and swinging around. It was a sight so unnatural looking, so painful and twisted and wrong even. I can't seem to wrap my head around how, but... And so everyone looked at him, not knowing what to do. And then he spoke. "Help me. Please help me," was all I could make out. And then he vomited and suddenly collapsed. The plastic wall lifted and the lights all came on. We saw the rest of them. They were all dead. Every one of them looked exactly like the little boy. Everyone had those strings attached, and we watched as all of them, even that little boy, as their strings were pulled on and their lifeless bodies rose on cue, and they bowed. Conclusion. We cannot be certain that the above statements make up a credible account, but unfortunately it's all we have to work with. The Puppet Master's regime sparked much debate among the theater companies. Several audience members had to go to therapy for years to come, and the show itself was covered up by the police. The theater company as well, 5 seconds back. As the police department, who had never managed to solve the gruesome murders of the cast and crew of the show, denied that the play ever existed. However, recent years, the story has resurfaced, sparking a lot of new conversations on the subject. The theater house that held the musical still refuses to acknowledge the show's existence, and most theater historians know nothing about the show in general. To this day, the identities of the anonymous lyric and music writers are unknown, and to our own knowledge, all recordings and police reports have been destroyed. Despite this, through certain pieces of historical documentation, some info on the production has been unearthed. The show itself had its first workshop in London in 1928. One of the songs, Get a Puppet, was recorded with vocals by 12-year-old Gareth Creeley. This recording is presumed to have been lost, though some say it is available on the black market of the internet. Other than that, no official records were ever made. Some ancient accounts say that an illegal tapping of the final scene of Act 1 was filmed from backstage, but we cannot be certain if this is anything but a rumor. As for any official memorabilia, very little of anything has survived. Until her death in 1994, theatrical historian Gladys Masters kept 2 large-scale promotional posters that she displayed at charity events, but these have since disappeared. Early costumes by Alice Livy, the costume designer on the play until she quit following payment disputes, are on display at the Piccadilly Theatrical Museum in Dover, England. Other than that, the previously mentioned playbills from the production's premiere night were given out, but most audience members destroyed their copies after seeing the show. Legend has it, around 10 to 20 survived. The show has grown a small cult fan base over the years. Here recently, an off-Broadway revival has been scheduled to perform soon. When I last broached the topic of the 1934 musical The Puppet Master's Regime, my knowledge was apparently very limited. I had originally believed that all of the guests who entered the theater on that fateful night were deceased, but I was incorrect. One lone audience member, Alice Corin James, who was 9 years old when her grandparents took her to see the show, now lives in Connecticut with her grandchildren. I gathered this information after my long investigation into the theater which housed the play's debut. I found myself on a wild goose chase, a long line of theater owners shoving me in different directions via emails or the rare private meeting. I was eventually given the home address of the little old man who shall go unnamed. This man had worked in several theaters over the past 50 years or so and had collected many, in quote, borrowed theater items. One of these items was a box labeled 34 Creeley Wright. The gentleman claimed that he had found it in the vaults of the August Wilson Theater, but I'm not sure if he can be trusted, as his eggs seem to be in quite a few baskets. If you understand me, the oddly numbered box contained several sloppily organized papers, all of which detailed the long-awaited production of The Puppet Master's Regime. The most interesting of these files was a bulky folder that covered the 1928 workshop in London, where the title of the show was originally Moriator's Friends, later changed to Moriator's Puppet, and as the music was refined, however, the title became The Puppet Dressed in Black, and then The Puppet Master, which was the title that they used during the actual stage readings. The folder also contained a partial script for the show, although many pages appeared to be missing. None of the song lyrics were shown in the script, though the song titles were printed in their place, along with the notes for the young actor playing the part of Moriator. Most of the notes are from the director, a man by the name of Richard Weber, but one particular note seemed to be a bit ominous. A little less vibrato on this one. Garrus, make me proud, make us both proud, Mr. Sheridan. This Mr. Sheridan never showed up in any other files. He may have been an unaccredited assistant director, but something about his handwriting didn't sit right with me. Anyhow, some of the song titles are rather fascinating. Tunes with such names as Never Mind Me, Mister, or Moriator Was an Orphan, and Get a Puppet. What the production seemed like any other. The characters aren't written in any strange way, much to my disappointment. It comes across just like a harmless little kiddie show, cutesy and upbeat. However, as the script progresses, the notes from this Mr. Sheridan become more evident and his messages become increasingly disturbing. We loved it, the way you used to do it. Stop doing what we never told you to try. Your cheeks puff at the end. Garrus, I love it. He loves it. We both love it. They love it. Meet me backstage after the reading, Garrus. He has a gift for you. Meet us backstage again, Garrus. They love to look at you. Never leave us, Garrus. You're too important to the Puppet Master. After reading up the scene where Moriator and his friends try to sell dolls, creatively titled the Doll Selling Song, I decided to stop and research Garrus Creeley. I was not prepared for the sickening results. Garrus Creeley was born on November 3rd, 1916. His mother had been a vaudeville stripteaser who lacked the funds necessary to support a child. As a result, he was taken in as a 3-year-old by a man whose last name was Sheridan. His first name is recorded differently in many documents. Most people believe it to be either Carmichael or Charles. Sheridan was apparently a Coney Island architect who designed elaborate funhouses and carnival freak shows. He was also a private composer, having written many vaudeville numbers and themes. Garrus Creeley Sheridan became a semi-popular vaudeville performer from 1921 all the way to 1923, upon which he was removed from the Sheridan home after claiming to have been sexually abused by his adopted father. He was taken to live with Annabelle and Henry McGregor, a middle-class family in Upper Manhattan. Annabelle and Henry, in an attempt to rid him of his childhood trauma, relocated to Worcester, England, with McGregor's relatives. Coincidentally, Puppet Master began rehearsal for the workshop a year after Garrus Creeley moved to England. The music and the lyrics were still accredited anonymously. Now, one might assume that this is just another depressing backstory to a child performer from the early 1900s, but it gets worse. Sheridan, along with being an architect and composer, was also a great patron of child pornography. He was the leader of a small group of individuals who specialized in the production of such articles. What makes this more revolting is that from 1921 to 1923, the years that Creeley was his legal son, Sheridan housed a child-centered burlesque theater/brothel underneath his estate. In 1924, he was placed in the Danvers State Lunatic Asylum in Massachusetts. He escaped in 1926, a year before rehearsals began for Puppet Master. Now returning to the script for Puppet Master, we actually have a tangible record for both the end of Act 1 and, well, as most of Act 2. The actual ending for Act 1, as it was written in such, Mortimer and his friends design a puppet exactly like the one that Moriator has seen in his dreams. This was explained in the song entitled "The Puppet Dressed in Black," which I assume was cut in the Broadway production. This puppet then comes to life and calls upon his magical powers to send Moriator and his friends into a parallel universe. Act 2 begins with Moriator finding his friends, as well as Mr. Obisker, to be asleep and dangling from puppet strings. The musical takes a more operatic theme, as we have 6 songs that are played one after the other, without a single interval of speech. The song titles in order are "Never Mind Me, Mr. Reprise," "I Can Hear Them Sing," "What Is This Place?" Moriator's Soliloquy, "Wooden Dolls," and "The Wind and the Whisperings." After this, Moriator is confronted by the old man in black from the first act, who, in a long monologue, explains Moriator's deep, passionate sexual longings. Moriator realizes his clandestine emotions in a song entitled Beautiful Music, in which the man and Moriator apparently fall spontaneously in love. Right before they allude to the thought of intercourse, the puppet dressed in black appears, jealous of Moriator's affections. Moriator strips naked in front of the puppet, allowing the wooden demon to seduce him. He offers his soul in return for the release of the ones closest to him. When the children and Mr. Obscure are returned, the puppet dressed in black and the old man reveal their sole motivations: to punish little children who repress the nature of their sexual responsibilities. They explain this in what would evidently become the show's title song, The Puppet Master's Regime. Then, in a spout of randomness, the puppet's face turns bright red, and he shoves Moriator into a bed shaped like a hand, apparently raping him. In the epilogue, we see that Moriator's friends have all been returned to the puppet shop, but none of them remember anything about him. As you would assume, the workshop did not do well at all. Anybody with half a brain could understand why a musical about children being obligated to have sex with adults and puppets wouldn't work now, let alone in 1928. It was met with such a terrible response that the authorities forced the workshop to shut down, classifying it as child sex tourism. Garrus Creeley was temporarily removed from the McGregor household for their approval in allowing him to participate in the production, when in reality the cast members were contractually obligated to never speak about the show to anyone outside the production. A week after Garrus returned to the McGregors, he was kidnapped from his bedroom. This happened the day before his birthday. After 2 days, the authorities found Garrus at the theater that he had been holding the workshops. He was discovered in the basement, tied to a bed, being violently raped by Sheridan. Sheridan, of course, was taken into police custody, where he died 2 days later of a lung infection. However, the most disturbing part about the crime scene was described by Officer James Cartwright. We broke through the door and started fumbling down the stairs. We could hear him, Creeley, screaming. We charged into the basement and saw puppets everywhere, all of them made to look exactly like that little Creeley fella. There had to be dozens of them all over the room. Some of them were neatly dressed like little dolls. Others didn't have any clothes on at all. It was so disgusting. I feel sick just thinking about it. 5 seconds back. Along with the recorded 76 Garrus Creeley-esque puppets that were found underneath the theater, authorities also discovered several articles of the occult in Sheridan's makeshift apartment. He had apparently begun to workshop an ancient god he called Potamus, a dark spirit who controlled all of life with invisible puppet strings. Most of the investigators believed that Sheridan had created this god himself using the surplus of insanity he had retained by the time of his death. They also found a 5,023-page novel that Sheridan had written over the course of the past 9 years entitled Puppets. It was an extended manuscript version of Puppet Master that was centered around the character of Moriator Abances, who was obviously based on Garrus Creeley. Following the events of Puppet Master, the McGregors admitted Garrus Creeley to the West Riding Mental Hospital, now known as the High Roids Hospital. In order to repair and accommodate his obvious mental damages, he was supervised by his adopted uncle, Dr. Gregory McGregor, who personally documented his progression from 1928 to 1932. When he was released, other than the folder containing information on the 1928 workshop. Most of the material present in box 34 Creeley Right is a mass jumble of different documentations. Everything from vague police reports to scathing reviews of the workshop. None of them are in any particular order. The only valuable document I've managed to find out of these is a list containing names of all the audience members who attended to the 1934 Broadway premiere. Seeing as how Alice Cordley James is still alive and was seated in the fourth row of the theater, I hope to contact her soon.